Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our fall webinar series in conjunction with the Texas Alliance for Patient Services. TAPS is a nonprofit association that provides professional development, networking opportunities, and resources for those who serve as patient advocates and in other patient service capacities. TAPS focuses on advancing the development of healthcare professionals to impact the patient experience. Visit taps-online.org for more information. Now, a couple of housekeeping items before we kick this off. If you're having trouble viewing our slides and you can't see the entire title, go ahead and click on that top black bar at the top that says View Options and click Fit to Screen. All attendee lines are on mute, but if you do have questions, we encourage you to put those into the Q&A box, most likely on the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to answer those at the end of the presentation. A recording of this will be available after the presentation on our blog at myrounding.com/blog. A link will also be sent out to you in the follow-up email. Finally, throughout this webinar, we'll be asking a series of poll questions. We'd really appreciate you to take the time to answer those for us and participate in this webinar. Again, this is all about engagement. So today we're going to first make a couple of introductions. We're then going to be talking about the different generations that are currently within the working avenue right now. We're going to talk about the differences between them, and then we're going to go into millennials and kind of debunk some of the myths, what people currently think about millennials, and then also how we can further engage those millennials. So the learning objectives are that we will distinguish between common interpersonal interactions that are universal and those that are unique to the millennial generation. We will describe unique methods for engaging millennial staff members, and we will go over common myths associated with the millennial generation and why these are myths, and then also discuss the benefits of the millennial work style and their point of view. My name is Katie Anthony, and I'm the marketing manager at MyRounding, a Huron solution. I'm being joined today by Jess Jones, who's the managing director at Huron. Jess, I'm really excited to have you on today and be presenting on this topic. I know it's a really hot topic. Would you mind just introducing yourself real quick before you dive in?
Yeah, absolutely, Katie. Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. This is a topic I'm very passionate about. I have a background in psychology and business information systems, and I've been working in healthcare for over 16 years now. Doing a lot of work around change leadership and change management when we think about opportunities around performance improvement within the healthcare space. And perhaps most relevant to this topic today, I also lead a team of over 25 millennials. So I certainly have a vested interest in the research that I've been doing on this topic.
Absolutely. Sounds like a great background.
So to get us started, I'd like to introduce this quote. I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on the frivolous youth of today, for certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. And to test out our polling a little bit, we thought we'd jump to a poll and see if anyone can guess when this was said.
So if you wouldn't mind, yep, go ahead and make your response there.
Like we've got a lot of different, 1970s, 1940s. Well, interestingly enough, this quote actually came from the poet Hesiod in the 8th century BC.
Wow.
Proving that even then, we were all a little worried about the next generation and quite sure they might destroy the world. So when we think about generations, I think it's important for us to first really understand what are we talking about when we talk about the concept of a generation. So a generation is a group of people born around the same time, raised around the same place. People in generations are thought to exhibit similar characteristics over a lifetime of shared experiences like shopping, TV, the internet. What's really exciting is that for the first time ever in this country, we have 5 generations living and in some cases working together. So who are we really talking about here? Well, first off, we have our generation called the traditionalists. Now, these are those individuals that survived world wars and the Great Depression, but in generational research are most often really recognized for having brought us the baby boomers. The baby boomers are our original largest ever generation. They were born roughly from about 1946 to 1964. They were then followed by the Gen Xers, who are comparatively small generation. They're only about 65 million people at their peak. And in, frankly, context of generational research, most people just aren't all that interested in them because of their size and how small it is. And then we get to our millennials, which were born roughly from about 1981 to 1997. And in 2016, the millennials actually surpassed the population of the baby boomers to become our newest, largest ever generation. And in fact, it's estimated at their peak, the millennials will represent about 81.1 million people. And to put that in perspective, the baby boomers reached to only about 79 million. And then lastly, we have Gen Z. And this is a group that's actually just starting to enter the workforce. So we'll spend just a couple minutes in this presentation talking about them as well. But to really understand the millennials, we first really need to put some more context around the generations that came before them. So our baby boomers. When baby boomers came onto the scene, they really exploded and really were just by size alone a generational revolution. In the 1950s, jars of baby food increased from 270 million jars to 1.5 billion jars sold annually. $75 million was spent per year in the 1950s on cowboy outfits, and more elementary schools were built in 1957 than any year before or since. And the revolution continued. In the 1960s, college enrollment jumped to 3.2 million and then exploded to 9 million in 1975. In fact, 743 new colleges were opened to support the glut of applicants. In the 1970s, we saw personal growth become an industry with books like I'm Okay, You're Okay. And as the boomers started to advance into their 30s and 40s, we saw health club membership explode to an $8 billion industry, up from just a few million dollars a decade before. And in the 1990s, Estee Lauder's anti-aging cream actually was one of their most successful product launches ever, selling 1 million units in just 6 months, 58% of which was to baby boomers. So you can definitely see how, as this population continued to age and grow, it really impacted our entire culture. But perhaps the most interesting fact, and one that I think all of us in healthcare would be curious to know, as our baby boomers entered the new millennia, those baby boomers aged 55 to 74 were actually responsible for the majority of drinking-related hospital admissions. And here we would have all just thought it was those college students. As we move on and talk a little bit about Gen X then, or sometimes what we call the I don't care generation, they really kind of have this unfortunate role of just being the bridge between the baby boomers and the millennials. In fact, not caring is almost a foundation of this generation. It's funny to think that Gen X really actually didn't even have a name for themselves until about 1991. So some Gen Xers were in their late 20s before we even got around to creating a name for this generation. And when you think about it, the X in math really refers to kind of an unknown variable or desire not to be defined. This generation grew up in a time of increasing divorce rates. Divorce rates doubled in the 1960s. The term latchkey kids was coined after them to refer to their afternoons spent without any adult supervision, where both of them lived with 2 working parents, and there weren't a wide range of child care options at the time. As they grew up, MetLife report noted media would portray them as the Friends generation, rather self-involved and perhaps aimless, but fun. But despite all this, when they weren't off listening to grunge music and riding around on skateboards, they also took the time to give us innovations such as YouTube, Amazon, Google, and Wikipedia. But that's it, so they only get one slide. Moving on to our millennials. So why do we talk about them so much? Well, if you consider all the ways that we just looked at how our baby boomers impacted our society, we have to believe that this group that's already as big as the boomers is going to really have even more of an impact on us as we move forward. And in fact, millennials currently, make up nearly 100% of all of our resident physicians. By 2020, millennials will make up 1 in 3 adult Americans. And by 2025, it's estimated that they will be making up as much as 75% of our workforce.
Wow.
So with this generation that is known for their participant trophies and obsessions with technology and being insistent on doing things their own way without being constrained by how it's always been done, what do they do and what does this look like? And a great example of this as I was doing this research is a very famous YouTuber named Guava Juice. Now, Guava Juice has nothing to do with juice. He actually has made millions of dollars, and I repeat, millions of dollars on YouTube by filling up his bathtub with various substances and then describing for his viewers what that feels like. And I mostly actually bring this up because I'm a little envious. According to my husband, I am a champion bath taker, and I really think this could have been my innovation. But the really funny thing about this generation is that they're really kind of a mystery unto themselves. In fact, as I was initially doing this research, I was sitting down with my family one night and shared with my sister-in-law, who's much younger than me and a millennial herself, the fact that I was doing research on how do you engage and work with millennials. And she said, "Are you really? Because I would love to know how to do that." So millennials even struggle with how to engage and work with millennials. So with a group like this and the endless fascination we've got books, blogs, white papers, articles about how they behave and misbehave at work, how much of that is really true? So we're going to take a little time to debunk some millennial myths. And here's our first one. They're completely different from us at that age. And we're going to jump over to a poll for this.
Yeah, so go ahead and take a second and tell us, do you think that they are completely different than us at that age? All right, poll results are coming in, and about 80%, a little bit over, are currently saying false, Jess.
And that would be correct. And in fact, Peter Capelli at the Wharton School has done a lot of research on millennials, and he says this actually comes up short. There is no serious evidence that there is a generational difference as you look at these different individuals. And in fact, a group of researchers at San Diego State University went ahead and did research on individuals from different generations at the same age. So they took a look at baby boomers in their 20s and 30s, Gen X in their 20s and 30s, millennials in their 20s and 30s, and really said, well, you know, if we compare how different generations behave at the same age, are they really all that significantly different? And what they found over research of about 500,000 high school students and 9 million college students is that there really weren't any significant differences. The only slight differences they found, millennials maybe looks a little bit more focused on areas such as tolerance and equality, which overall I'd say is a pretty positive thing for us from a cultural perspective.
Absolutely.
All right, how about our next question here? True or false? They want more purpose at work.
Again, we have a poll up there, so take a second to click true or false there. Millennials want more purpose at work.
All right.
And it's coming in again this one's actually close to 90% are saying that it's true.
All right. Well, interestingly enough, this one is false. If we take a look at the research, millennials don't favor altruistic work more than any other generation. This is a very, very popular myth, though. In fact, companies are increasing their volunteering and focus on social issues to attract millennials. But when we find, if we look again at this generational research, that's really actually something everybody likes. It's attractive to everyone. In fact, as they looked at this research, it shows that baby boomers at the same age as the millennials today were slightly more altruistic. Millennials actually are less likely to give money to charities. They're less likely to want a job with some sort of social worth, and they're even less willing to change their eating habits, even if it created more food for the starving. So why do we have this myth? Well, the interesting thing that we find with this research is that when we talk about millennials really wanting more purpose, it's what they really want to do is feel like their work is meaningful and that they actually have an opportunity to make a difference within the structure of the company they're working for. So they want to know that their ideas are being heard and that they have an opportunity to actually influence decisions. So when we talk about more purpose, that's really what they're looking for. It's not the social worth constructs that media has really portrayed. It's more about making sure that they have a seat at the table to provide some ideas, and they really have some fantastic ones. All right. On our next one here, true or false, they want more work-life balance.
I have another poll question up there. People are already weighing in, and across the board, it's looking like people are thinking that this is true.
Yep. And I would actually agree. This one is, I would say, somewhat true. Studies do actually show that millennials have a slightly more increased desire for greater work-life balance. But what they really found in another study, as they looked at this closely, is that what millennials really found value in is flexibility. You've got to think they grew up in this world with email, text, phone, FaceTime, and it shows them that they can really accomplish things whenever and wherever they are. So they're not necessarily looking to work less, but they're looking for more flexibility in the way they work and when they work. All right. And our last one, true or false, they need special treatment at work. All right, looks like we're coming through. Most people are coming in at a false. That is correct. This is actually false. In an interview with Peter Capelli, who, as I mentioned earlier, has done extensive millennial research, there is no evidence that millennials as a generation need special treatment. Now, what they really do need, and this is true for anyone that we employ, is for you to understand them as an individual. So while we have lots of qualities that make us distinct, our background, age, race, gender, marital status, parenting status, understanding each person as an individual and their individual situation is really what drives us to understand who we work with. So when I go back to that example that I shared earlier of chatting with my sister-in-law, the millennial, and the fact that she was really struggling with, well, gosh, how do you work with other millennials, even though she's a part of that generation? As I asked her a few other further questions, the issue that it really came down to was the fact at her work, and she works at a startup, she was really the only one that had children. So really the difference here at the end of the day is not her generation that defines her engagement and her interaction, but it's her parenting status. And I just have to take a moment to point out, with these as the cutest kids ever, how could you not want to be focused on them?
They're pretty darn cute.
All right, so how do we engage millennials? Well, we've established that as individuals, they may not be all that different. There are a few important things to keep in mind when working with this generation. So first off, millennials are very focused on the concept of trust. In fact, only 19% of millennials said that most people are trustworthy. That's about half of other generations when asked that same question. 89% said they like it when companies are focused on social issues, not again because they're looking for companies that do something around social worth, but because companies that are focused on social issues are more trustworthy. And in research of over 13,000 millennials, when asked what they wanted from work, the key factors were really around how can I get transparency, good use of time, and a supportive work environment. Again, all things that we're really all looking for. It's just when you think back, they really struggle with that trust concept quite a bit. But I think the good news for us, for all of us that are working in St. Jude's, is when they were polled about industries that they found to be the most trustworthy, 8 of the top 25 companies they chose were actually healthcare related. In fact, St. Jude's was #1 for anybody that's curious. Okay, number 2, millennials are looking for good leaders. So millennials planning to stay at a company for more than 5 years are twice as likely to stay if they actually have a mentor in the organization. In fact, in one of the interviews I did as part of this research, a millennial admitted to me that she would actually adjust her work schedule to coincide with the schedule of a senior member of her team so that she could interact on a personal basis with that individual and build them into a mentor for her. So millennials have grown up with mentors and coaches all around them, and that is something that they are looking for from us in the workforce. Second, millennials are also looking for continuous feedback from us and leaders rather than just getting feedback on an annual or semi-annual review process. And, frankly, who of us as leaders really want to focus just on doing annual reviews? We get so much more productivity from people and more accountability if we take the time to give that feedback on a continuous basis. And again, with these individuals that have grown up with all these coaches and mentors in their life, they're not only excited about that, but they are expecting that from us. So it's a great opportunity to go forth and make sure we're providing that continuous and timely feedback. And third, when we talk about engaging millennials, one of the myths that we debunked earlier was that millennials they don't want social worth, but they do want a purpose and a way to have an impact. So they're not expecting to sit in the CEO's chair on day one, but they do want that seat at the table. In fact, in one research study that I looked at, millennials would rather be paid $40,000 a year for a job they love than $100,000 a year that they thought was boring. And the exciting thing about this generation is they grew up with the concept of innovation. They are excited to get in and problem solve. And let's face it, in healthcare, we've got one or two problems that we could probably have them help us solve. So when we look at ways that millennials have innovated, if you're curious about this, what might this look like? First one, 2 interns at Facebook with absolutely no ask whatsoever from their senior management team came up with the idea of the rainbow filter for your Facebook profile. It ended up being one of the most popular filters that Facebook had ever released. Now, has anybody ever attended one of those 5K zombie races where you're racing for charity, and just to make your life a little bit more interesting, you have zombies coming out and chasing you as you run along your route? That was actually a millennial innovation, even though it's one that may have been responsible for a few nightmares on my part. And then lastly, one of my favorites is at the University College of Maryland, 3 students noticed in their dorm building dining hall that a lot of food was getting thrown out by this dining hall every evening. They started something called the Food Recovery Network, and by the end of the school year, they had recovered over 30,000 meals that were donated to nonprofits in the DC area. And in fact, to date, they have donated more than 2.5 million pounds of food and have over 230 chapters in 44 states.
Amazing.
So when we talk about the opportunity of providing innovation to our millennials, these are the kinds of things that they can do. And I just think it's so exciting to think about what they can do for us in healthcare. Okay. So I promised that I would spend just a couple minutes talking about Generation Z, since you might start to see some of them crop up in your workforce. This is a generation that was born around 1997. We're still learning a lot about this generation. And in fact, one of the things that we've learned is they hate the name Generation Z. But we do know that there are a couple things that do make them tick. And one of the most important things to keep in mind is they feel very strongly they are not millennials. So when you think about what is interesting to them, first off, technology is in their DNA. Gen Z has never known a world without the internet, mobile phones, or social media. They've been swiping, liking, growing their global social network their entire lives. They use an average of 5 screens per day, and they are used to constantly evolving technology. They're also used to very bite-sized snippets of information like Snapchat, texting, et cetera. So they're used to taking in information on a myriad of topics very, very quickly. So when we think about communicating with them, one of the important things to keep in mind is communicating in more of short bursts than in long, drawn-out meetings. Next, they're private. Perhaps because they've watched a lot of their older siblings as these millennials get into a lot of trouble from posting something controversial on social media. These younger individuals really don't want to be tracked. They like apps like Snapchat and Whisper that have seen explosive growth in the last several years because it's something that doesn't stay out there. And in fact, Facebook has lost 25% of this demographic since 2011. They also, interestingly enough, like face-to-face communication, which might be pleasantly surprising to a lot of us, really because it's not something that they get a lot of. So they really appreciate and value the time and what it means when someone takes the time to communicate with them face-to-face. In fact, 58% of those in Gen Z said that is actually their preferred mode of communication.
Really surprising.
I know, who knew? They're entrepreneurial. This is very similar to their millennial brothers and sisters. They like to be pioneers, and they appreciate really being able to take some sort of ownership in the work that they do. Unlike previous generations, though, that might have, say, made a demo of their music to send to a record company or something like that, they're not waiting for somebody to discover them. You know, they are going to get out there and create their own labels and create their own companies. In fact, 72% of current high school students said they want to start their own business. Their idols are YouTubers like Guava Juice that I showed you earlier. Diversity. And in fact, it's not just that they value diversity, they've grown up in a world with social media that has made the world so small that they don't really understand a life without the concept of diversity. 81% of Gen Z have one or more friends who are of a different race, and members of Gen Z are almost always more likely to say that they have friends that also have a different sexual orientation. So they tend to be a lot more comfortable with the concept of people having very different backgrounds than their own. They're also fairly pragmatic. Unlike millennials that kind of experienced a relatively stable economy when they were growing up, Gen Z has never known a world that hasn't involved the war on terror, poor economic periods like the Great Recession. They're also more a product of that more jaded generation of Gen X that we talked about earlier, and some of that seems to have rubbed off on them. So as a result, in one study I looked at, fewer Gen Zers than any other generation. In fact, only 32% felt the country's headed in the right direction. They tend to value a lot more security than risk-taking and tend to be a lot more cautious than millennials. So as we think about moving forward and what does this all mean for us, with 40 million millennials already in the workforce and 4 million joining the workforce every year, this is a generation that will truly be driving the culture and the pace of change in our workforce. Engaging with them requires you to take the time to understand them as individuals and demonstrate your trustworthiness through your good leadership principles such as coaching, rounding, mentoring, and providing feedback. But perhaps most exciting at all, I think this is a generation that is here to help us solve problems. And I'm pretty sure we have a few of those that we could use help solving in healthcare today.
Absolutely. Well, Jess, thank you so much for walking us through the different generations and kind of the myths that we're currently facing and how we can help solve those and engage not only the millennials, but other generations as well. I mean, it really sounds like, really, as long as you're treating them like people and trying to engage them, then you can do that. And as with that, I really wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. Jess, you presenting this information has been really informative. I really hope that everybody on the line got something out of it. And thank you for joining us on the line. I know that it's a really busy time of year, and taking this time out of your day, we really appreciate that. Again, go ahead and type your questions in the questions box, and we'll be answering those momentarily. If you do have additional questions after this webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email is kanthony@huronconsultinggroup.com. It's up on your screen there. Also, a recording of this webinar will be available on the MyRounding blog. A link will be sent out in the follow-up email tomorrow. And again, we just wanted to thank you for joining. So with that, we're going to jump into the questions. We do have a couple of people who have raised their hand. If you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and typing in your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That would be great. And while you're typing that, I'm going to dive into some questions here. So Jess, the first question is, how do you get millennials to focus on overall results of the team and not just individual results?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, just like with any individual, and this isn't just millennials, one of the things that we see, when people aren't meeting our expectations is, one, we haven't set expectations for them, but even more, we haven't explained why this is important. So when we're working with millennials, I generally find they actually are very accustomed to working on teams. They've grown up doing a lot of teamwork. We see a lot more teamwork that's having happened when millennials were in high school and college than many of us saw in previous generations. So if we're struggling with millennials really just focusing on the individual and not focusing on the team, generally the first thing to do is sit down with them, an individual, and really, one, understand why that may be the case, but two, also help them understand the why and why the team's success drives their success. I think we don't always take enough time to share that and make sure that people understand that recognition for the team also drives recognition for them.
Great, thanks, Jeff. All right, the next question is there a way to encourage millennials to lead, take initiative? This person finds that most of them will kind of follow the pack.
Yeah, no, that is a really good question, and it's definitely been a challenge that we see with millennials. I talked earlier about the fact that they're so used to these coaches and mentors that, unlike previous generations that couldn't wait to get out into the workforce and jump in and wanted to take that leadership role, they struggle a little bit more with the fact that that's something that they are supposed to do. And that really does get back down to the expectations. So consider, again, they're used to that coaching perspective. So when we want them to jump up and say leaders, or be leaders, excuse me, what we often fail to do is tell them that that's what we want from them. So we need to actually not just assume that's going to happen, which frankly we could with previous generations. They wanted to jump in and lead. We actually have to sit down and say, hey, I want you to take a leadership role here. And this is what leadership actually looks like. Don't forget to go into that second piece, because again, just as you might easily assume they're going to jump in and be a leader, don't then say, I want you to be a leader, and assume what being a leader means to you will mean the same thing to them. Take the time to share those expectations. And the biggest thing is they want to live up to those expectations. They're used to being coached in that way. So you need to take the time to explain it, and then they will work to live up to it.
Great insight. Thank you. Jess, we have a charge nurse that's on the webinar here, and they're asking for examples of how they might engage their night nurses.
Yeah, well, so I mean, the first question that, I always have to look at is, what am I really trying to engage them to do? Night nurses have a really challenging job, right, in terms of their responsibilities and what they're trying to manage throughout the evening. So, one of the things is certainly getting back to expectations, but I think the other piece is engaging them in terms of the fact that nobody really woke up one day and said, man, I can't wait to be a night nurse. There are a few, to be fair, but it's not a really common thing. So the other thing that I would really focus on, and I don't think this is necessarily unique to millennials, but is a good one, is really emphasizing the importance and the value of what they do. So taking the time to share, we know night can actually be a really challenging time in healthcare, right, in terms of the health of our patients, the success of our patients. So are we taking the time to really engage with them on the importance and the value of the job and what we're really looking for them to accomplish, rather than just thinking, man, I'm on babysitting duty for the night. So that's one of the biggest things that I see in being successful in engaging with the night nurses.
Absolutely. Really going back to that why.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The next question is, you addressed how to address millennials. How should millennials interact with baby boomers? So go in the opposite way.
So, like I mentioned, millennials are looking for mentors. And so I actually see a lot of millennials try to engage with baby boomers to get them to mentor them. And I don't know, as baby boomers, if we're always taking a step back and understanding that that is what's being asked of us. So I would say, understanding that that's the way that they are looking to engage with us. They do really understand that there is a lot that they can learn from the older generations. This is not a generation that's necessarily always coming in and saying, I know everything. They do know a lot about technology, and I certainly sometimes see frustration from millennials that baby boomers don't necessarily understand technology the way they do. But what I have actually found to be incredibly successful is often creating dyads between baby boomers and millennials, and you get this great opportunity to bring together somebody who has a ton of industry experience, a lifetime's worth, combined with somebody that really understands technology that is really influencing the work we're doing in healthcare today. And that is an incredibly powerful combination that I've seen work time and time again.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, the next question here, and continue to type those into the chat or the Q&A box. Next question is, what types of schedules or benefits have you found to be attractive to millennials?
All right, no, that's a fantastic question. So, I mentioned earlier that they're really looking for those flexible kind of schedules. So something that we're seeing more successful, if we can do it, and we can't always, right? I mean, let's be realistic. If we're working from a nursing perspective, we have shifts that we need to have covered. So there's not always that flexibility. But when we do have that flexibility, is creating concepts around core working hours, where we can say, there is an expectation that, from 9 to 3, everybody is here, in the office. But, outside of that, we have a little bit more flexibility, which allows those millennials to continue to, maybe they're coming in a little bit later and staying later, or coming in earlier and leaving earlier. But having that flexibility and that power around their schedule is a really powerful way to engage them. And I'll have to say, what I really find is they don't tend to turn it off. So I'll give you an example of one of the high performers I have on my team. She's got 2 young children, she tends to start work, right around 8 o'clock when she's got her kids, off and into daycare, but she stops right around 4. She works very intensely there, stops around 4 as our kids are coming out of daycare. She's gone right up until they go to bed, and then she works very intently for another couple hours. So I'll see her working there, 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And she's very happy to do that. She's incredibly engaged. So finding ways to have that kind of flexibility is really powerful.
Great. All right. So the next question is, are there ways to more effectively reward and recognize millennials as opposed to the baby boomers?
Yeah, so a couple things on recognition. So there's a lot of really interesting research on this. And the biggest thing, kind of like what I said earlier about, every individual is different. What we don't often do is take the time to ask somebody how they would like to be recognized. You have people that are very introverted that would prefer not to be recognized. Out there, people that are very extroverted that can think of nothing better than to be recognized in front of a room full of an entire group of people. So again, really understanding how they like to be recognized, and also really understanding that it's not always about money. I think when you look at this research around recognition, one of the things that we find is that money as something we use from a recognition standpoint is a very short-term way to recognize and reward people. So really, if you're understanding more what they're looking for, you can do a better job of recognizing people. And sometimes, again, is it about, I want to be recognized in front of everybody, or I want to be recognized in front of the CEO, or I really prefer a quiet recognition, or a Starbucks card, or the opportunity to go home early on a Friday afternoon. I think that's really the key around recognition. And I don't know that that's actually all that different from our baby boomers. It's more that the baby boomers kind of got taught this is how you get recognized, versus now the millennials, again, are expecting you to ask them how they'd like to be recognized.
That's a great point. All right, another question that we've gotten in here is, we've gotten the feedback that millennials in college especially are being told that if they don't get promoted or given a raise in the first year, to leave, because the company obviously doesn't value you as an employee, and you're not going to necessarily grow there. So how would you address this, Jeff?
Well, first off, I'd fire that recruiter, but that is an entirely different conversation. I really do think that's terrible advice to give to anyone. It is certainly true that millennials have grown up in this participant trophy generation, if you will. So it does create a little bit of that expectation of, you are going to get rewarded all the time for everything that you're doing. So again, it goes back to the question that we had before, which I think is a great one around the concept of recognition, right? So are we taking the time to really recognize and help people know that they're doing a good job, and that recognition doesn't necessarily involve a raise or promotion? I think that's actually very old school thinking to me. When you talk about career growth for individuals, you need to be sitting down and understanding, what does career growth look like for them? What are they really trying to get out of this job opportunity? And then finding the ways to give them those opportunities. That creates the growth that you want, totally separate from anything related to a raise or a promotion.
Great, thank you. All right, so those are currently the questions that we have that's come in. Thank you so much for participating and sending us all of these great feedback, or these great questions. We do have a few more minutes, so we'll stick around. If you have any more questions, please feel free to send those our way, or email me after the webinar. Again, that's kateanthony@huronconsultinggroup.com. So with that, we'll stick around, but thank you everybody for joining us on the webinar today, and we hope you found this beneficial.